All right, guys, back here on Southeastern 14 with Max Barr, and we are previewing the Sweet 16 action in the SEC and the NCAA tournament. Two SEC teams left standing, Alabama and Tennessee. We're going to talk about Alabama's matchup with North Carolina, but before we do that, let's tell you about our friends at BetOnline. The tournament is here. BetOnline, your bracket headquarters for the season. They have the best bracket contest out there, odds, lines, and info on every game, of course. And every round, right up until the national championship, you can access the most up-to-the-minute wagering information anytime from your desktop or mobile devices. So be sure to head on over to BetOnline today. Get in on the action. Remember, use that promo code. We always tell you about it, BLEAV, Believe, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, Max, it is the wild, wild west. Hasn't been necessarily as wild as we thought to this point, although there is someone other than a top 4 seed advancing. We know Clemson did advance, so they will play Arizona. But this game, North Carolina and the Tide of Crimson Tide. Alabama, Tuscaloosa. We've had our fun with Alabama this year, and it's been interesting to look at kind of the trajectory of their season because, as you know, I was somehow all in on Alabama back in December when they're losing games 3 in a row, but yet we saw them kind of hit their stride after that. Wound up running out to a 11-2 record in SEC play. They finished 13-5, struggled a little bit down the stretch. Then gave up 102 in the SEC tournament to Florida. But they've looked really good in these first 2 games in the NCAA tournament against Charleston and Grand Canyon. They won that first one 109-96. As I said, that was the scoreline not indicative of how the game was actually played. Alabama won that convincingly. Then the Grand Canyon game, it's one of those where you kind of feel like they're playing into Grand Canyon style for a little while. It's kind of ugly. We talked about it's just a game that was nuts. Every possession felt like it was pretty interesting for a lot of reasons. But they find a way to win that one, and now they get ready for the top-seeded Tar Heels, who, admittedly, I said I think Michigan State could have a chance to upset them, move on. But you want to talk about a team that's looked good in the first 2 rounds. North Carolina's looked really good, too. 90-62 over Wagner, 85-69 over Michigan State.
Yeah, and the scariest part coming from an Alabama's perspective is the way that North Carolina has won. It's been with defense. Michigan State came out and jumped on them early. Tyson Walker was going nuts, and North Carolina just shut the water off and won with defense. So that's one angle to how North Carolina is playing. I jumped into this game and found a bunch of different trends and stats. I'll jump around them. One thing that I'm excited for is this point guard matchup is unbelievable. In the KenPom Player of the Year rankings, RJ Davis is 9th, Mark Sears is 10th. I mean, that's pretty cool. So we're gonna have a great matchup of point guard. Everyone says March is all about the guards. Well, hey, you're gonna get 2 of the best in the nation in this one. So super excited for the matchup at the point guard position. Looking at bench minutes here, Alabama's got a little bit of an edge. North Carolina, very, very tight rotation, solid rotation, but very tight. 332nd nationally in bench minutes. And then Alabama up there at 133rd nationally. So Alabama will probably get some more production from the bench. So far, the word is that Latrell Wrightsell will be good to go. That's a name to monitor this week because, man, is he important for what Nate Oates wants to do. And then a few other things that I'm looking at, just some trends. They don't put too much weight into these. They're just trends. But North Carolina, 3-6 when they allow 80 points or more. Alabama, probably has a decent path to 80 points in any game they play. But also North Carolina is the 6th oldest team in the nation. So they're going to have that experience edge. You know how valuable experience is in March. And then the last little thing I'll jump on before I send it to you is North Carolina has 7 losses, and in 5 of them, Baycott's got 4 or more fouls. So they do have a few wins where Baycott has been in foul trouble. I'm not saying this is an end-all, be-all. I'm just saying with the pace of this game and how Alabama likes to fly, if they do get Baycott in foul trouble, that may bode well for them. I got a few other things, but what are you seeing here, Blake?
Well, I think you mentioned the Wrightsell one. That's the big one because, again, we talked about how Alabama started to dip a little bit towards the end of the season. And remember, there was, I think, 4 straight games he didn't play in there. The one game, I think he came back and only played like 8 minutes. That was against Florida on a
Barely
road
played.
game. Yeah, barely played in that game. But you can do the math, especially over the past month. Games that he has played in versus games that he hasn't played in. Alabama's fared a lot better when he's on the floor. Because again, even that game where he played 8 minutes against Florida, they got beat 105-87. He played 21 minutes against Florida in the SEC championship, or not championship, in the tournament. Lost 102-88 there. They won a couple of those games against Ole Miss. They did beat Florida without him in overtime, but they had that game in Kentucky in there, the game against Tennessee, where they lost both of those, and so he's a very important piece here. And we've mentioned too the 3-point shooting and how it took a dip with him out. But remember, he comes back. Look at the Charleston game. He goes 5 of 6 in that game, scores 17 points, played 26 minutes, and then, as you said, left early against Grand Canyon. So that is, I think, the one thing you have to circle if you're starting with Alabama is he needs to be on the floor. I think to feel like you have a really great chance to win this game. And you mentioned the North Carolina side of things. The defense, I think that's something that certainly stood out with them because, you can look at their defensive numbers and there's a lot of, I always say it's the Christmas colors on Ken Palm. A lot of
Yep.
green, a lot of colors of the tree here for North Carolina when you look at just what they've been able to accomplish. Now, again, I would say this, and I'm not saying that North Carolina is a bad defensive team or not as good as maybe their numbers suggest, but I would also say there's probably not a lot of offenses in the ACC this year that are going to be what Alabama is and have the type of ceiling and or style that you're going to see with Alabama. So I am curious about that, but that maybe would have come into play a little bit more had this been like a game played 2 days after the previous one. But North Carolina has time, so they can certainly try to replicate that and everything, in 5 days versus a 48-hour turnaround like we saw Grand Canyon have to do with Alabama. So I don't know if you read into that as much, but the experience factor of North Carolina, what you said a minute ago,
Yeah.
that's the one thing I also have circled is, man, you've got a lot of guys who have played a lot of basketball.
Yeah.
And I think that, and not to say Alabama doesn't, but this North Carolina team, they are built to, I think win a national championship because they have those ingredients you need when you just think about all the big minutes and all the big games that these guys have played in to get to this point. So yeah, that's definitely something. And of course, Max, before I send it back to you, the Cormac Ryan revenge game here, where Alabama trying to get revenge on the former Notre Dame standout whenever they successfully knocked off the Tide in the NCAA tournament as an 11 seed a couple years ago.
I didn't think about that. I forgot about that. That's good. That's good. The main thing that I'm worried about here, coming from an Alabama perspective, is how well UNC rebounds. Man, do they rebound. First in the ACC, both in offensive and defensive rebounding. We know how Alabama likes to attack the offensive glass. Well, one thing UNC won't let you do is get those offensive rebounds. They have this nice rotation of 4 big guys. It starts with Harrison Ingram and Baycott, but Jalen Withers in Washington. Withers maybe a bit more so than Washington, but they get rotated in there too. They all have defensive rebounding rates above 20%. So the rebounding doesn't drop off when North Carolina goes to the bench. They're still rock solid. But one thing that defensively might play into Alabama's hands a little bit is North Carolina's defense doesn't force turnovers. Now, they're still a stout defense, very stout, fundamentally sound. They're going to box you out. They're going to keep you in front. But Alabama has struggled with turnovers a lot this year. And that just might be one aspect where they don't get taken advantage as much. And then another thing, and Blake, this was probably the thing that stood out to me most. Now, when you look on the teams on paper, it's the SEC's best offense against the ACC's best defense. You got Davis against Sears. You got Baycott, who probably has the advantage, but then you got probably the bench and the shooting that kind of tip your hat towards Alabama. Very close either way. The thing that's really sticking out to me is when you look at the VSiN betting splits so far, North Carolina has the highest public bet and handle of every Sweet 16 matchup. The highest there is. Opened up at 3. They got hammered up to 4.5. Right now, 84% of bets, 87% of the handle is on the spread and 84% of the bets and 81% of the handle is on the money line. North Carolina is getting hammered right now. There is a ton of money on them. And if there's one thing I saw nonstop this weekend was how many favorites won, how Vegas got decimated. Well, I wonder who the most public bet team of the Sweet 16 is and see how they fare. That is sticking up to me like ding, 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 ding. Watch out here, Max. This is nasty. What do you say? What do you say, Blake?
Well, I mean that and we're kind of used to that, right? Because whether it's like a Kentucky, a North Carolina, a Duke, a Kansas, like I feel like with these kind of teams in these spots like this, like you're always going to get a lot of that backing, I think, on those teams when you look at it. And that is going to send that thing up a little bit. Look, if you're looking at this from a betting perspective, I don't know that there's a greater lock out there than any over you want to find on an Alabama game, because I think they're 25-9 this year. That the overs hit 25 of the 34 games this year for Alabama. It's an even split actually for North Carolina, 18-18 for them in the 36 games they played. But yeah, I mean there's something to that, like you said. There's always an angle like that you can certainly look at and feel like, okay, there may be something to really look at here for Alabama and feel pretty good about it. I mean, look, the further you dive into this game, like I said, I think it's for Alabama, it's very clear. Like I believe, at least based on how these two teams play, they're going to be given every opportunity to play the game they want to play. Like they're not going to have to play outside of what they want, right? Like it's not going to be a grinded out game. I'd be surprised if that's the case. I think these two teams, we know, both get up and down the floor. As you said, they both got good guard play where you've got a point guard on each side that's just going to completely get the ball anywhere he wants it to. He's going to drive the offense and kind of fuel everything they're doing on that side. But it's the North Carolina defensive aspect here, and I'm curious too for Alabama defensively, right? This is one of those games where you talk about defending teams in different ways. I mean, defending Grand Canyon and defending North Carolina is completely different. And it's still a team that's going to get to the free throw line. When you look at North Carolina's percentages of their points, they still get to the free throw line. 21.2% of their points come from there, which is 66 nationally. So we know, and look, a lot of that's based on just either Baycott being able to get an offensive rebound and get fouled, or getting the ball inside to him, he makes a move, he gets fouled, or it's the strength of some of the guards being able to drive and all that. So yeah, I think this is a big prove-it game to me for Alabama defensively, because there's no doubt that when you look at what North Carolina can do offensively, I mean, we've said this how many times this year. The teams that Alabama struggled with are not just teams like them, but elite offensive teams, like truly elite offensive teams, whether that was Florida, Kentucky. I know Tennessee, it didn't look like it against Texas, but Tennessee can be an elite offensive team at times. Auburn was an elite offensive team for a lot of the year. Then you go back to those teams we talked about earlier in the non-conference for Alabama, whether it was Arizona, Creighton, Purdue, teams like that, right? I mean, now that you look at it, it's kind of fascinating, isn't it? Clemson's still left standing now. They were also on Alabama's schedule. So it's wild to look at how many of these teams that Alabama played back in the non-conference that they lost to Clemson, they lost to Purdue, Creighton, Arizona, teams that are all still in this NCAA tournament. And as we said, they went 0-2 against Tennessee. So I say prove it for that reason, not just from a defensive standpoint, but you kind of, Alabama has not been able to pull out games against these kind of teams this season. Yep. And so I think that's definitely something we circle here as we go into making our picks for this game. So,
yeah, so I'm torn on. I have my pick, but I'm not very confident at all. So basically, it comes down to two things. When I look at the numbers, when I look at the play styles, I saw Alabama in person last week, saw North Carolina this past weekend. I have a good feel for both teams. My favorite team, well, former favorite team, now that they stink, used to be in the ACC. So I watched a lot of North Carolina. And this is the thing. Everything on paper, I think, kind of points to North Carolina. They've got the guard. They've got the big. They play the defense. They have the rebounding. And then I look at those betting splits and I see how far the public is on them. And I'm like, oh, no, don't you dare take North Carolina. So I am torn in that aspect. If I'm a betting man, I'm staying away from this one. But if I have to make an outright pick, I'm going to pick North Carolina to win outright, just mainly because of that rebounding. They rebound the heck out of the ball, and when they go to the bench, it doesn't drop off. That's my biggest thing right there. Hey, if Alabama comes out, Grant Nelson stays out of foul trouble, they battle on the boards, Mo D gets in there, battles on the boards, man, I like Alabama here. So if that rebounding is even and Alabama's winning, that's how I think they can hang with them. But I'm a little bit nervous about that. I'll take North Carolina to win outright. But if you're betting, man, I would stay away from this one. There's high variance 3-point shooting, makes me nervous with the public side, but I'll take North Carolina outright.
I'm glad you mentioned the variance on the 3-point shooting, because remember, if you're a North Carolina fan, or if you're just someone casual watching for the first time because you want to bet on this game or whatever, and you want our thoughts on Alabama, we're an SEC channel. If you want our thoughts, we've said all year long, I don't know that there's a higher variance team in the country, because Alabama, and again, this has been my quote all year, sometimes Alabama's just going to go outscore people. They may not be as good defensively. They may not be, this or that compared to this team. But sometimes they will just go in spurts offensively where they will just outscore you and they'll beat you. And maybe it has to be 95-93, but it doesn't matter. That's just what they'll do. And so I think Alabama games have been really hard to predict this year because of that, even though, as I said, I think there's been a common theme with some of these. And to me, looking at it on paper, this is the kind of team that Alabama has not been able to kind of slay this year. And I think that, aside from a couple games here or there, more often than not, though, you've seen these teams just find a little bit of extra something, whether that's, a little bit better defense, a couple things offensively, whatever, right? So I'm also going to pick North Carolina, but I think you brought up a good point where, like, the foul trouble and those kind of things are really going to come into factor here, or come into play, because North Carolina is not that deep. And I think that's where, but again, that could play into North Carolina's hands because Alabama's going to shoot a lot of threes. And we also know Alabama likes to attack, but, that's where, all right, you're trying to attack against Baycott and all these kind of things. And you said it. If you can get him in foul trouble, think about how much that changes this game. It changes it completely. So I'm curious to see what Alabama's kind of approach is right off the bat, because we mentioned the thing about the Alabama front court was they had an advantage in these last two games, you felt like, against Charleston and Grand Canyon. But this is not Charleston and Grand Canyon. And so I mentioned kind of the prove it earlier. I want what is a pretty deep Alabama front court when you think about how these guys are starting to play, whether it's Nelson, Diabate, Stevenson. I mean, we've mentioned Waggy. Like, there are a lot of guys that can Pringle. I mean, they got a lot of options. So maybe I should put a little bit more into it there, but I don't know. I mean, listen, we've seen Hubert Davis coach North Carolina in one other NCAA tournament, and they made an incredible run all the way to the championship game, and this is their second time around back in the tournament. They didn't make it, of course, last year. So, I mean, they've figured out a way to exploit some of these matchups, make runs in these tournaments, and they look really good so far. So I'm going to take Carolina too, but I'm kind of with you in that. The way that money's moving towards North Carolina makes me really think about this whole Alabama money line / plus whatever this number winds up being. So
I think if there's anything to take away from this preview, man, this can be a good game.
Oh, yeah. I think, let's see, if you had to rank them, we won't spend too much time on this, but I would say this has to be one of the better. I mean, I would not be surprised all this winds up being the most entertaining Sweet 16 game, just because of the play style of these two teams.
It's RJ Davis versus Mark Sears. That is awesome. That is awesome.
Yeah, give me the over in this game. I think it's gonna be a lot, and it's the night game. It's the late game. Like, that thing's gonna be starting probably like 9 Eastern or
prime time.
No, 10 Eastern probably. So yeah, in Los Angeles, it'll be a lot of fun. So there you go. There are thoughts on North Carolina and Alabama. Hey, Alabama, maybe we just gave you the kiss of death, which is what you want in reverse. So
there you go.
There you go. But we appreciate you guys watching it all. As always, hit the subscribe button. We'll have more coverage of the NCAA tournament. Thanks for watching. Talk to you again here soon at Southeastern.